All right, we'll call the Plan Commission meeting to order. Everybody have a chance to take a look at the minutes?
Yes, sir. I move to approve.
Second, whatever.
Motion second to approve, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion possible action on a recommendation of the Common Council for amendments to Municipal Sign Code Chapter 202-6 sub C and 202-6 sub E.
Thank you. I think at this point, we're all pretty familiar with the draft ordinance, but I think before we get into the details of it, I think the question just has to be asked, you know, is the Plan Commission looking for having a process to allow message boards, electronic message board signage in publicly zoned districts? So what that means, and I passed out a map to each of you with all of the publicly zoned properties highlighted in purple. Jim, there's one right there for you too, if you want. That shows all of the properties, and there it is on the screen, that are zoned public in the city. So those are the properties that this draft ordinance would provide a mechanism via conditional use permit for electronic message display. So the question just becomes, is it something that we want to move forward with getting into the actual ordinance, or does the Plan Commission wish to forward a recommendation not to move forward with an ordinance? Because I don't see a reason to go through all of the details and all of the criteria that are established within this new draft ordinance that talk about, you know, lighting standards, nits, size, glare, disability glare, dusk to dawn time, luminance standards, all those things. You know, I think it's important to answer that question first. Obviously, a week or so ago, the school brought out an example of what this would look like, whether it be at the school, whether it be here in front of City Hall, whether it be in front of the Hudson Utilities building or in Grandview Park, wherever it might be. That would be a good example. I hope that everybody was able to at least take a look at it. Or take a look at pictures that are in the packet. But, you know, again, I think, you know, at this point, I think it's important just to get that direction from the Plan Commission, you know, before we get too far into this. So,
You didn't credit the photographer.
Mayor Rich O'Connor.
Well, I just want to ask some questions with
Yeah.
that in mind, and I was kind of bantering this earlier. Number one, do we limit it just to these public properties, or what happens if a church wants one? What happens if the Lions Club wants one? What happens when?
It's all publicly zoned, that's it.
It's only publicly-
just
Okay, so
publicly zoned.
then they're automatically no dice.
That's a whole different discussion.
Okay.
Yep.
Then that solves that. Number two, I guess going back to the school. When we were here and approved their lighting plan for the new school, they said they would do certain things, and they haven't done them.
Again, this has nothing to do with the school application. If this is approved, the school district will have to come to us to go through their process to get that sign approved.
I understand that, but in the enforcement of hours and things like that, you know, they're not adhering to what they said they were gonna do.
That comes up when they come in here with their if this is approved, that comes up when they come in here to apply for their sign.
Okay, I see, okay.
So each application requires approval.
This is not approval by any means of the school district's request for their sign.
I understand that. But I use them as an example
Right.
and some track record that we have on them, you know, because they came through with the new school. Okay. I feel that, you know, looking around, you know, at our neighbors, at everybody around us, that in the case of a school, that we're probably the one school in this whole area that is lacking a public service message board, let's call it that. Every other school does, and it, you know, shows what's going on there. I mean, I think it's especially important, but again, public, to show what's going on, and then if it could dupe as you know, helping the city out or, you know, anything like that at some point in time, very valuable. Not everybody's gonna put them up. It's only gonna be isolated cases. However, we have residents here that don't want it to deter from the value of their property. They don't want it to keep them up at night. They don't want it to interfere with the ambience of their neighborhood, and I guess I understand that too. So where do you draw the line? Do you deny the whole thing because they can't, you know, he can't make it work in certain areas, or do you move ahead because it is a good idea and it is needed in some spots? That's where I'm at.
Okay?
Have there been requests or thoughts of signs in other areas yet?
Well, again, this is public land.
Public
So
land.
we were talking about using some of our land for signage that would allow for public service announcements and things like that. So when you think about it, and I'm not suggesting that this is where they would go, all right? But when you think about it, you think about the public utilities building, you can think about some of our parks, even Lakefront Park maybe, a sign telling people at the boat launch whether it's open or closed, things like that.
What concerts are going on? Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
No, that's what I was wondering, whether,
Grandview Park would be another one potentially.
Yeah, over there at the ball fields, yeah.
Well, you know, on that basis, like you say, people that are unfamiliar with the area, I mean, that's one way to get them acclimated very quickly and tell them what's going on, which I think helps the area and the community, which is so very wanted in that respect. So I guess I would say my opinion is we should move ahead with this, but very carefully. Again, to protect our local residents.
and each one would come on its own for approval then?
Right,
Correct, okay.
yep.
And we could make it
They'd have to
condition,
stand or fall on their own.
we could make conditions that if they didn't adhere to the rules, that it would be shut down and things like that.
Sure.
Okay. I'm okay with that then. I'd say yes. I'm for proceeding.
All right, we're gonna do, if there's a motion and a second, then we'll open it up to other conversation.
Well, then I make a motion that we proceed with this.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Mike Kipchak with the High Point 625 degree.
Now you-
Oh, yeah, come up to the mic,
Now you
please.
need to
and-
come up and say your address and introduce yourself again.
Hey, good evening, I'm Mike Kipchak with 625 degree up in High Point. So, Mike, I was listening to what you were mapping out here, and were you trying to make the point that the number of places that are highlighted, every one of those would have the opportunity to put any electronic sign under this change?
Theoretically, they could, yes.
Yeah. So, theoretically,
Yep.
we could go from one sign to dozens of electronic signs in neighborhoods that don't have to be approved if they're on public property.
Well, they would have to be approved. They would have to first hold a neighborhood meeting, go through a conditional use permit public hearing, which would be here at Plan Commission and then at council. So there would be at least 3 more layers or 3 more meetings before
Let me-
any type of approval.
Let me just frame this differently, okay? Because this is a sign ordinance that's being amended, all right? Without this, not a single one of them would be allowed, not one. So we need this ordinance if any of them could be considered. Without this, not a single one of them could be considered.
And so, how big of a negative is it not to have electronic signs throughout Hudson?
Well, I think that was the question that I asked. That's what I was leading with.
That's what I'm trying to continue your conversation because it kind of went down a different path. But this is really good information. I think it's something to be aware of, that without looking at the visual, it's hard to potentially understand how many public places there are that we could have public signs in very populated areas.
Please look at that map though and identify the properties that are pointed out, that most of them are schools, parks, county courthouses, You're not gonna have them in any parks. I mean, 2/3 of these are automatically disqualified right from the beginning. I mean, truly look at it, and you'll concur, I think.
Why are they disqualified?
Well, because why would you put a public sign up in Prospect Park?
Because somebody doesn't know what's going on in Prospect Park. What I just heard was you want to be able to advertise what's going on in those various locations.
Centrally, maybe in one place, not in every individual park. That makes no sense at all.
Well,
That's where the conditional use permit comes in, that you then sort that out and not let them proliferate the place unneededly. I understand, in other words, we're not giving them carte blanche just because it's pink property. They all have to come back.
and you're increasing the size of the signs also, right?
We haven't gotten to that point. I mean,
That-
yes, we could be.
Is that part of the change?
Correct, it could be. I mean, there's a blank where the sign, the maximum size allowance hasn't been completed yet. We haven't even gotten to that part of the discussion. We haven't even moved past whether or not we want to do this, to that original point, right?
Well, I thought there was some discussion about the sign is going to go from X to X. A certain size that's in the guidelines right now.
In the draft ordinance, correct. There is.
There is a change in the size, right?
It says, under no circumstance in a public district shall a sign exceed blank square feet,
X, yeah.
X, whatever that is.
So there hasn't been any discussions about changing.
So it could go bigger than what would be allowed, it could go smaller than what's currently allowed. I mean, we haven't, I'm trying to get the ball rolling to the point where we actually have some movement here on the ordinance itself. Or if we're not going to, then we're not going to. To the point about, a lot of these purple areas, there's several of them that are also just, drainage areas or
Right.
ponds or things that are, way kind of off the beaten path that I would never foresee us, if it was a city-owned property.
So what, at the last meeting I came to, Mayor, you discussed being able to use it for public safety, things like that.
Yeah.
Have them interconnected.
Right.
So, after thinking about that, that sounds like a great idea. And there's a lot of electronic signs already in place. Have you tried doing that with any of the current electronic signs to see how that would work?
No,
Because they're already in place.
no, we haven't.
So would that be a step that you would try prior to changing this?
Well, they're private institutions. Let's use Associated Bank as an example.
That's one.
They don't have to let us on their message board. Why
No,
would they?
but the idea was that if there was some safety issue, let's say there's an Amber Alert, that you would agree, you would negotiate with them that, hey,
Right.
can we use your signs?
So,
Or was that idea only for city-owned signs?
no, but we're not talking about private, and when you say city-owned, you mean city-owned or publicly owned?
Publicly owned.
No, that's a whole different discussion about whether we're going to allow people that have private signs to be able to use electronic signs too. And my thinking was that my position would be that the only way that we would allow any additional electronic signs in the city, new signs, is if they agreed that they would plug into that type of system where we could then spread that message when necessary across all boards, they'd all be coordinated. Now, whether the current owners of these signs have that capability, we don't know yet. But
Okay.
we do know that going forward, they all do, or we won't consider them.
And I don't know if any of you have been down at the high school between maybe 7 and 8, and then in the afternoon, how congested that area is.
Right?
And is the electronic sign that's going to be scrolling similar to texting and driving? I mean, are people going to get distracted by that sign?
I think the way the ordinance reads is you could put reasonable conditions that you can't have animation, you could have it switch, you could have static images that switch every so many seconds. I mean, that's the whole point of the conditional use permit idea, is that, as long as we put reasonable and measurable conditions on an approval, whether it be at the school, whether it be a Grandview or Lakefront or wherever, that's how, those are conditions, right, that we could place on it. We could say, I mean, you could have, yeah, like a movie playing, but I don't think that's what anybody would want to see. But I think, you know, that's certainly a reasonable criteria, you know, to say no image can be displayed for less than X number of seconds before switching to the next one, or, you know, whatever.
Okay. So I guess my last question is, if you do not pass this ordinance, can the school still get an electronic sign, or is this step one in the school getting an electronic sign approved?
If an ordinance were not to be approved, what they could do then is apply for a variance to the Board of Appeals, which would have nothing to do with Plan Commission or Council. It'd be one group that would, you know, make a decision based on the merits of that hardship that they would have to prove.
Okay, if you change
Whether
the
it be
ordinance, will it make
anybody.
it easier for them to get approval for the sign?
I'm not gonna be specific to the high school, but it allows for a way to do it. Yeah.
So a couple things I want to interrupt here. Tiffany or Emily, Pat Casanova is trying to sign in and he's saying he can't get into the meeting.
Let me. I'm not seeing him.
No, he's trying to get in, so maybe he doesn't have the right link, or somebody could text him, email him a link, and then, I'm sorry, was it Mike?
Like,
Just so you know, this is not in front of us because of the school. This is something that we have been talking about for 2 years, before the school ever came in with an idea to put a sign, electronic sign out in front of their property. They have just now kind of compounded added a different dimension to the issue, okay?
Okay.
So this is not in front of us because of the school district.
okay. So I think I'm speaking for Jim and the rest of the residents at High Point. We're concerned that if you pass this, it's the first step of that getting approved. And we really are adamantly opposed to having an electronic sign across from High Point. Okay, just for your consideration. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mike. Jim?
Hi, my name's Jim Ludiger. I live at 624 Hickory in High Point, also with Mike. Did everybody receive the petition that was sent to the city council? Okay, just to make sure everybody got that. So you know, there are roughly 20 homes in High Point, and unanimously were opposed to this. Not the ordinance, but the school district's potential request for a variance. I've also spoke to people on Vine Street, in addition to those High Point residents, and they also are very concerned about this from both a property value standpoint and a safety standpoint. But my question too, then tag on to Mike, is as I read the original ordinance, it looks like it's designed specifically to protect residential neighborhoods. And I think anybody would draw that conclusion. Is there a way for this ordinance to be tweaked a little bit to accommodate the same objective? Can it be worded a little tighter, perhaps, to exclude the possibility of a CUP request in areas where it's clearly residential, like High Point and the corner there at Vine? So that's kind of a question. Is this the done deal, or is it still open for change?
It's open.
Open for change?
Open for draft and submission.
Okay.
I mean, we're in the formation stage.
Well, I would really request the Planning Commission to give it an additional look at and see if there isn't a way to kind of tighten this up a little bit to protect residential neighborhoods. High Point's not going to be the only one that's going to come to you guys in the future and say, gee, a message board in our neighborhood is just not appropriate. And I would ask you, and I'm going to make the same comment to City Council at some point, I'm sure, that, so you all live in homes, you all live in Hudson. What if somebody wanted a private residence, just hypothetically, wanted to put one of these message boards in their front yard? Where it's proposed at the high school is 80 feet from our property line. It would be essentially the same scenario. So anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
All right, thanks, Jim. Tiffany, where are we at with Pat, do you know?
I'm
It's
in.
online.
He's in.
I'm on not.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, by the way.
How much of this were you able to hear, Pat?
Just about all that Jim had to say.
Okay.
And he and I have spoken about this before.
Okay, and did you hear Mike's comments, or?
No, I did not.
Okay.
That's okay.
Not Mike Johnson, but.
Hipsher.
All right, so Pat, we do have a motion and a second to approve this. And can you, Tiffany, can you put back on the screen for Pat the map?
Yeah. Just one moment. There we go.
So,
All the purple parcels that you see on the map are public zoned properties. So with this sign code, anything could really be put on any of these parcels, which includes schools, parks, some stormwater drainage pond areas, government buildings. So yeah.
A lot of area.
well, and as Fred pointed out, there are some that are non-starters, Prospect Park, Burkmo's Park.
Sure.
But these are all of the publicly owned properties that could be affected by this ordinance. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's only publicly owned properties that are affected by this ordinance.
And Pat may not have heard that each require a CUP.
Yeah.
Individual one. Yeah.
Yeah, anytime that there would be a request, they each require their own process. So it's not automatic that just because the ordinance would pass that they get to put up a sign if they want one.
But that's just the criteria in which to grant the permission to have one,
Yeah.
right?
If I understand your question, the answer is yes.
Yeah, if you look at the draft ordinance, you look at that section sub E that talks about public districts, then it goes down to sub 3A, 1 through 8. Those are the criteria. So
Yeah.
obviously the need, whether the proposed sign is compatible with the purposes of this chapter, the impact on the proposed sign, or the impact of the proposed sign on the character and aesthetics of the neighborhood and community. All those things you would weigh in on and then create conditions if you were to approve, or reasoning in which you would deny a sign in a public district.
Yeah. So those are our safeguards.
Yeah, and also we can, when any application that comes in, we can request that, we can mandate if we want that, they would be able to communicate, any of these signs would be able to communicate and coordinate with each other to put up the public service announcements that we would think are critical.
That'd be good.
Mike, I'd like to see us do a look back at that draft ordinance written that Jim suggested. I don't see the harm in that.
Claire, what do you mean?
Well, Jim Ludiger alluded to looking back at criteria of where to protect the neighborhoods that potentially could be affected by a bad placement. So I think
But wouldn't all that automatically be covered by the section that Mike just read? That with each individual one, we would look at it and decide if it was appropriate or not.
Yes.
I don't know if that's what Jim Ludiger was hinting at.
But
Jim-
that accomplishes the same thing.
I don't know if it does. Ask Jim.
Jim?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Well, come on up to the mic, Jim, and
I don't know if you were there to hear that, Pat.
I'm a little deaf and I don't wear my hearing aids because the mask, I can't come off, so.
And you're old, Jim.
And I'm old, it's true, both
Yep.
true.
Geezerhood has snuck up on us. Jim, did you hear Mike read that section of the ordinance a couple minutes ago? About how each individual sign on any public property would have to individually be approved with a conditional use permit.
Yes, I heard that. Yep.
Does that solve your problem or answer your request?
Well, not really, again, it's my interpretation, Pat, but as I look at the new changes to the existing ordinance, it appears to me that it opens up the ability for someone to come along and get approval on a CUP. For example, give me just a second. Section H, electronic message displays must be located a minimum of 150 feet from any residential district, period. The addition to that part of the ordinance, unless said electronic message display sign is to be located in a PUB public district. So again, it just opens up the ability, in my opinion, for an entity to come along and get approval for a variance. So,
A conditional use permit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and
no.
it could be denied a conditional use permit for all the reasons cited.
Okay.
I mean, a conditional use permit isn't a rubber stamp, or at least it hasn't been.
Right. Well, again, I just wonder if there isn't a way to tighten it up a little bit, to make it more difficult. And I think I could probably come up with some wordage to that effect for an entity to get approval. In my opinion, it kind of opens the door for the school district specifically to come along and say, we've met these criteria, we've gone through the process, why don't you grant us the variance? So.
But that's where we would.
Thanks, Jim.
That's where we would take the input from the communities, all the issues that were brought up would then be weighed on whether you get the final approval or not. And I think that's what, we have, that's the second check and balance of the system. Yes, by changing this, it gives them the opportunity to do that. But that's not a slam dunk guarantee that they can get one, because all these other factors will then be weighed as you're bringing up. I mean, if we don't listen to our city residents, shame on us, before any maybe approval would be given. It's not an automatic. I mean, if you're thinking we have to either write the ordinance to prohibit or not give people a chance with good reason and good cause and it can be controlled properly, that's the question before us. And I guess I'm hoping we can control it properly if it were to come and be of public want and good, to do that, but without harming your investment, your home, your lighting, everything about it. I mean, I live close to downtown. If you guys want to know what intrusion is, I mean, just open your window at night and you can hear the bars and the bands and all that stuff. And I mean, after you live here a while, you get used to it, you just kind of smile, but
What about?
Can't beat them, join them, right, Fred?
well, it's like living by the railroad tracks. I mean, come on, you got to get used to it. So,
Right.
but anyway, I mean, I feel that we don't. What I'm trying to say here is I don't know how we can deny them the right to ask for one. Ask.
No, and I understand that, Frank. Another example, as I read through the ordinance, is the distance from a residential neighborhood.
150?
Yeah, so I did a kind of an informal survey of message boards and ordinances, both in Wisconsin and nationally. And 150 feet really is kind of a minimum. You know, there are many places, there are counties in Wisconsin that have over 1,000 feet clearance for this kind of signage. So, you know, again, I would just ask you to go back and take a look at the ordinance and see if there aren't some ways to tighten it up a little bit. You know, it just seems to me to give too much leeway for entities to come along and request a variance, so.
So, any suggestion on how you would tighten it up?
Pardon me?
Any suggestion on how you would tighten it
I
up?
think I would start with the distance from a residential neighborhood. You know, that would be one thing right away that I would change. So, you know, if you look at the high school property along Vine Street, there are places inconvenient for the school district, but there are potential places for that sign to be placed in excess of 150 feet from residential property line. And I'm talking about the east side of the football field. So if you think about Vine Street and think about the east side of the football field, if they were to place a message board there, it would still affect residential neighborhoods and yet be outside of 150 feet. So maybe that could be extended. That's just one example, Rich. I guess I'd have to look at it again to come up with some specifics, but I could do that.
I guess what I see or read into your comments though is, you know, signs are meant to be read within a certain distance. You increase that distance to a point where, how big do you have to make the letters before you can read the sign?
How big is the actual
And
board?
then how big does the sign have to be effective? And so you're kind of dancing with the devil on that issue that, you know, to keep a sign small, you have to unfortunately be down in that 150 or, I mean, could we change it to 200 or something? Of course we could, but to get it 1,000 feet, I think as you hinted, I don't see that as viable at all, because then why even have a sign? You can't, I mean, a 5 by 10 sign from 1,000 feet, if you can see that, you've got better eyes than I've got.
No, I don't mean from a road location.
No, I understand that, but I mean, from whatever is passing by that sign that is reading it, you know, 1,000 feet's a long, you know, whatever distance it is, as it gets further, it gets harder to read.
football
And the
fields.
signs have to be bigger.
Right, and I understand that too, but if you think about the east side of that football field on Vine Street, that sign potentially, if it's on a standard, could be within 20 feet of the road and easily read. But, you know, again, it would still be, in my opinion, too close to a residential neighborhood. So, anyway.
You don't want any direct light from any sign going, shooting into somebody's bedroom or living room or anything like that.
Yeah, and with that, I would.
We get that, we get it.
You know, and again, this is not a hearing to review I understand that, to review a request for variance, but, you know, I guess I could see the school district coming along and saying, you know, we want to put this message board in. The residents of High Point would not object to a monument sign that was lit or even backlit with messaging on it. It's the electronics that are our issue.
There you go. There's maybe some of the cure to some of it, right there. I mean, how is the sign presented? Under what format? You just kind of said, you know, use this format, and then it could work. It could work.
But, and again, that's the school, so.
That's the school, yes.
The type of sign you're talking about is what? I mean, the message doesn't change?
Well, as I look at a monument sign in front of the YMCA, it has removable letters. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of.
These would be electronic.
No, with no electronics.
He's talking about a static sign.
Oh, static.
That's backlit, not electronic, so there's no.
Right.
That can be just as bright as a electronic sign.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for me?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you.
Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, anybody else?
Before we go to vote, can I just get clarification quick for Emily on the motion that was on the table? So we're thinking that it was a motion to move forward with just the code, but not to approve it as is, correct?
I made the motion and the motion was not specifically stated to amend it, it was to move forward. I can add that to it if people want that, but that was not included in my initial motion. So if that
Size
clears that
issue needs
up.
to be dealt with still too.
What's that?
The size issue needs to be dealt with still too.
Tonight?
Well, either that or we're forwarding a recommendation without any of that addressed to council.
So the discussion going on, if you can't hear this, is we do have the blank there for the size of the sign. And the way Mike had framed this to begin with is that he just wants to know if there's appetite to move forward with the change in the sign ordinance for public property. And if so, then we can deal with the fill in the blank, at some other time, or let the council do it?
Well, the council would have to do it because you'd be forwarding this recommendation to go with the ordinance to council.
I wouldn't let
No.
to be done in plan commission. As
So
far
that's
as
just
the
what I'm looking for clarity on the recommendation then, or the motion, right? Do you want to put a size criteria in there, or do you want to take it and take that out and just deal with it on a case-by-case basis? So you could do that too.
I would take it out in case by case, but we should have a minimum max. But what I would suggest moving forward with Fred's motion first and then deal with that at a later time. My thought.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Did you get that, Tiffany, so you understand what the motion is, or Emily?
Yep.
Anybody else? Yeah, Mike, come up again.
So this is Mike Kipscher again, 625 Hickory Road. So is the motion to continue to work on it and move forward, or is the motion to approve what you have written? I'm not clear.
I look at it as a recommendation to move forward with what we have written.
Right.
Is that what your motion was, Fred?
Yep, but like, I think we've gone to great effort to point out the potential checks and balances of this thing, that I'm not trying to leave you high and dry, and we didn't hear what you said.
No, I was just wondering what the clarification,
No, it
because
wasn't clear to me, I guess, when
Because
they brought it back, when the girls brought it back up, that.
it sounds like you're making a motion to accept something that isn't complete.
Well, except the draft ordinance that is there, but that can, as Randy says, we can amend some of that. Change it if need be.
I still think that size thing, we got to deal with that.
Tonight?
I think so. Otherwise, we're forwarding a recommendation that.
Here's my take on that, is that, and I hate to bring this up again, but the school has pretty much set, I think they're set on the size of the sign that they want. And I don't think that's gonna change based upon anything that we do here tonight.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I believe that a sign in front of the high school is going to be a different size than a sign over at Grandview Park, or a sign out in front of the county office building. I think, given the location where they're at and the desire to be seen from a greater distance, is gonna dictate the size of those signs, the same as where the school is proposing their sign would dictate the size of their sign. And I don't know how you can change that or write that into an ordinance like this without knowing the circumstances for each one of those cases. So what are you gonna say? We're gonna allow a maximum of X, but only for where? Which one of these lots? So I don't think that we can do that. Because I think that really allows for some potentially monstrous signs that go in places that might not be appropriate. So I would advocate for doing this on a case-by-case basis, kind of what Randy was saying. I think Fred said that.
I would like, I don't know if we can do anything about height of sign, but
And if we,
can.
if we,
I don't like high signs at all. I mean, the lower the better. I mean, that's just my criteria. And I mean, if we could say 10 feet, I'd like to say 10 feet. I think that's probably impractical, but 12, 15 max, maybe. I don't know. I don't know where the numbers are on that, but don't want it big sticking up.
if I were to amend this tonight so that we don't have blanks in the thing, I would just say to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
I would just, I would suggest you just strike that sentence. And then add sub 9 or sub 10 and say, you know, signage, you know, electronic message boards, height, area, all those things will be, you know,
Determined on an individual
handled
basis.
specific to the
Approved
application.
on
location.
individual requests.
Is each
Reviewed and
one-
approved on individual requests.
Each one requires an individual request
Right.
anyway.
For appropriateness,
Yeah,
and just follow that same language in
Yep.
sub 3.
yeah.
Got that, Emily?
Yep, he does.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Is that your motion, Fred?
Yeah. You let me talk a lot, so yes.
Everybody good? Everybody good? All right, we have a motion in front of us. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. I don't have anything for future meetings. Anybody else? Anybody?
Not aye.
Is there a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.